I was going to draw a boundary, I would, and this is probably based mostly on my work experience with natural resources, and considering how some of the, well, it's kind of a mixture, it's a patchwork of how the water flows, and using that watershed boundary that goes up there past the Pinocchio Hills, where a lot of that precipitation and that snow accumulates and melts out and feeds those wetlands, comes down into the streams and recharges the groundwater aquifer and the surface waters, maintains that livable condition, and then it makes a big bowl all around, and drains down here into the lowlands where they used to have the glacial Lake Duluth, this big glacial scoured flatland, and the clays are deposited. But the watershed stops somewhat short of the Schwabian Bay area and up in the peninsula, and I think the communities are more linked around the bay, both in their economic trade, the infrastructure routes, but especially recently in a lot of the communication. And so I'd have to include the bay and the communities around that bay when I drew that boundary. I have been so impressed by the community and the ability of the communities, and I don't just mean the tribal community, all the communities around the area, to come together. And in the hearings that can be so stressful, and especially when they're moving them all around the state at the last minute, I hear people talk about, even when they disagree, the commonalities they share and the respect they have for each other. And it's not to say there's not tension, but that respect for each other, that diversity of opinion, that acknowledgement of that, and almost always the recognition that the integrity of the natural landscape is key to the culture and the long-term existence of tribal and non-tribal communities in the area. I think that's very wise. Wisdom that's not always echoed across the country and the world. Yeah. I remember my mother taking me out to all the nature centers, the museums, helping me get this appreciation for science, education, and the natural world, and then finding so much adventure there, and always going out in those small little postage stamp forest preserves that we have down there, and feeling some level of excitement and a connection there. So that had, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that had a huge piece. But there was also, more recently, a significant experience. I was in the military and deployed on both campaigns, the one in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I learned a lot there. And particularly, well, in both cases, after the fact, I should mention that resources were not as directly on the surface of many of the things that I did. But in hindsight, looking backwards, considering the future of Afghanistan, the mineral resources there, considering the role that petroleum has in the culture of the Middle East, the economics of the Middle East, global trade, that has had really where the responsibility comes from. Because as I look forward and we consider the implications of the projections that we hear about these things, we've got to figure something out. Because I don't want people to have to experience conflict in any manner, having lived through it myself, and having seen what it did to the communities there, having even a conflict that sometimes was well beyond their control. We see a lot of that cooperation here, even though we've got such a heated debate about water and mining. But I think we have to rethink some things if we're going to continue to exist in a decent quality of life on this planet. Meaning, definitely, a purpose. But this has been exceptional, even in that regard. And I think it's because of the land, what the land has, and the communities that live on that. I think there's something healing about the natural world, which is not surprising since we kind of rely on it. Even if we transmute it into building materials and things that we don't recognize anymore, there's that connection that goes back way back. River, there's so many things that need to be done by a small government to try and provide for the people and care for the land that was given, that the Creator gave them, and it gives that purpose. You know, it gives a lot of purpose because there's a lot of things to do, particularly particularly in the face of what we see going on outside the boundaries of the reservation. That same expectation that we do comprehensive, beginning to end, considering everything, to do a good job at the end of the day. In that case, it was so that everybody can come home. In this case, it's so we make the right decisions looking forward. And I think that I try to bring that every day, so that we can, all the pieces that we're working on, whether it's mining is what I would define as the major acute stressor or threat to the community land, or climate change, which is the major chronic one. And then all the social factors. I'm not involved with this, but rebuilding the language, rebuilding the ways of life that were lost or taken. And so on those natural resource issues and those connections between people and the land that come out of natural resource issues with a tribe, just being respectful of the community, trying to understand a different perspective from when I was brought up in, and then just putting a lot of work into that. Lessons that have been passed down through traditions, the lessons that come out of living with deep roots in a place, generations of roots. And I've seen that in cultures in the Middle East too, and it's something I admire, something I don't have with my own background, but I admire and appreciate, and I particularly like the way that those deep roots seem to directly or indirectly engender the long look forward. And so, to the extent that other communities can consider that as well. Because just because you bounce around like maybe I do, doesn't mean that you don't need that same long history and long look forward if you're going to have long-term sustainability or survivability.